Hey guys, so today I wanted to make a video about the Leica Q2. It's a camera I've owned now for almost 3 years, and I'm sadly kind of going to be parting ways with it after upgrading to the Q3. And I kind of just wanted to share a bit of a long-term thoughts on the camera and what I think about it and who I sort of think it might be for, and share some of my sort of thoughts and feelings and some of the photos I've taken on it over those sort of past 3 years. So I wanted to start by saying that this is not a technical review, and I'm not going to go through the specs of the camera. You find plenty of information about it online if you want to have a look. But I kind of wanted to share my thoughts and feelings on the camera and the photos I've taken with it based on 3 years of usage for fun and for work. And that's been sort of in the travel industry and also in weddings. I also want to stress that this is just my opinion, and so please do take it with a pinch of salt. I'd always encourage someone interested in a camera to try and borrow it or rent it to properly test it out, because you can listen to hundreds of these videos on the internet, but you won't really know if it's for you until you properly have a go with it. So yeah, if you can manage to get your hands on one, either borrow one from a friend, or if you can rent one or rent a secondhand one online, I'd really encourage you to do so. Right, okay, I'll start with the good things and then move into some of the downsides and some of the reasons kind of why I decided to upgrade to the Q3 from the Q2. And whilst I chat, I will share some of my photos that I've taken with this camera over the past few years. The build and use experience, I think, is a big reason as to why people buy this camera. I mean, it's a lovely looking camera. I mean, that's subjective, you might not think so, but the build and user experience of this camera, I think, is a big reason why it stands out. It's not a pocket camera, but it is small and it is pretty lightweight. It is definitely a little bit front heavy with this lens, but it's a really lightweight camera that you can sort of sling around your body and around your neck and not feel too weighed down by it. The camera has decent weather sealing, so you can feel kind of confident kind of taking it out in the rain and the weather, and like, you know, more intense weather. I don't know if it's very particularly waterproof, but I've used it in the rain and in the snow, and it's been fine. I've also, mine's in like decent nick. There's a couple of like little scratches here and there, but very, very minimal. But I did see on Daniel Kim's Instagram feed his one. I'll see if I can get a photo of it. He's a wedding photographer based in the US, and he's worked his hard, to say the least, and it still seems to be getting amazing photos. So I'd say these are quite rugged cameras, and you can definitely sort of throw them around and not feel too worried. Ergonomically, people have kind of complained about this camera in the past because it's not really got like a grip that you would like hold on to. And I know some people have put those grips on or use the thumb grip on the back, like on the M cameras, to kind of give it a bit more of a grip. But to be honest, like, I've kind of not felt the need to have that. I've shot the Q series now for 3 years, and I find it absolutely fine to use like this. It's not something you're going to hold like this all the time, but if you're kind of having it around your body, around your neck, I think it's absolutely fine. This little indent on the back, it doesn't really look like much, but I think it does kind of give you a nice natural spot to kind of put your thumb like that, and that's kind of how I would shoot it. The way the camera manual focuses from this point, you just sort of little press this little indent here, and you're quickly into manual focus, and the EVF kind of immediately, as default, kind of goes to zooming in, and it's a very, very nice manual focus experience from that perspective. Okay, moving on to the lens. I believe, having watched a few videos online and seeing people's comparisons of it and my personal experience, I've not done a proper test, but it does definitely feel wider than 28. I'd say it's probably more like 25, 26. So if you're really used to shooting 28, you might find this a bit wide, marginally. I mean, you can crop in a little bit and it's fine, but it does feel slightly wider than 28. I would say if you're used to shooting 24mm and you really like that, this is fantastic. And it being 47 megapixels means that you can kind of crop in a bit anyway. So, you know, you've got plenty of room to kind of play with there. But yeah, I would say the lens is really special. Like, there's a certain look that you get from this lens, particularly when it's wide open, that is stunning. I think it's quite unique, and it does stand out when I compare it with other cameras I've used and things like that. And I feel the switch to the macro modes is really great, particularly You know, you can get to 0.17, so you can get to 17 centimeters close focus, which for a Leica camera is not really that heard of. And it's really cool, like combining that mix of macro with a wide angle. You can get some like really really interesting detailed photos. I'll share some here as I talk about it, but particularly if you're a wedding photographer and you want to get those like detail shots, you can get really nice like ring photos or details, like things like that with this camera in macro mode. And the switch is so fast, you just literally got that done in macro mode. So it's, yeah, very, very easy to use, and a lovely lens. The only downside I would say is the lens cap. It's nice, it's really nice metal lens cap, but it does stay on, but it's very easy to come off. And I've knocked it a few times. People have knocked it a few times when they've borrowed the camera from me, and yeah, I don't know. They really upgraded this for the Q3 by putting one that sort of tightens on. It's much more snug. Yeah, it's just something to think about. So I really love the sensor of the Q2. I don't do a lot of straight out of camera stuff, so I don't use the JPEGs at all, but I do think it gives a really lovely base to start working from. The straight out of camera RAWs kind of, to me, feel a bit more magical, whereas the Q3 ones, they're a bit flatter and ready to be worked. I'd say they're more akin to like a Sony file where you can really work it and go wherever you want to with the edit, which I personally prefer because I love editing. But if you kind of want something that's more like, got a bit more of a vibe straight out of the camera, maybe the Q2 is kind of the one to go for. I think once you get this camera set up and you sort of figure out how it all works, it's really, really simple to use. The menus are really simple. You don't have to dive deep to kind of get change the things you want. And you've got everything kind of at your disposal. Like you've got the shutter speed dial on the top, you've got your aperture ring here, you've got your switch to macro mode, you've got your on switch, manual on switch. You've got this little dial on the corner here. I use that if I'm in aperture, aperture priority up here. I will use this to control the exposure commutation. Or if I'm in manual mode, I will tap down on that and I will adjust it to change the ISO. That's kind of how I use it. And it's really nice. It just means that you can basically not have to go into any menus, and you can visibly kind of see where you're at, which as a photographer I really enjoy, to be able to look down the camera, right, okay, I'm going to be shooting at f8, I'm in normal mode, I've got my shutter speed on auto, and I know from here I can pick the camera up, have a look, see where I'm at EV, and just adjust to get it where I want it to be. And that works well for me. I just shoot in auto white balance, which is a bit laggy and a bit slow on this camera, but because I'm changing everything, I'm shooting raw, I'm changing everything in post, it doesn't really bother me in the same way. But that might be something to consider if you're shooting JPEGs. The auto white balance is a little bit slow at times. I think it's great for weddings or social gatherings where you are maybe a guest and you want to take some photos, or you're working there as a photographer, because it's really subtle, it's really quiet. I'll make a shutter sound next to the mic. It might sound loud to you, but like maybe from here. It's a very quiet camera. It's sort of, if you've used an X100V before, it's sort of a similar sort of ticking sound to that. It's quite quiet. And I think in a loud sort of social situation, you can be really subtle. And because it's so small, I think it's quite easy just to squeeze in and just like grab a quick photo, like steal moments without kind of interrupting too much of what's going on. Yeah, I would say compared to like a big DSLR or a big mirrorless body with a big lens, it does feel quite unintimidating. I think the massive downside for this camera for me is the fact that it's only got one card slot. That's an issue across the whole Q series at the moment. I think having one memory card slot just gives you that, well for me, it gives me that worry of like, oh, what if the card fails? What if something corrupts? What if there's an issue? And I think there's that niggling feeling in the back of my mind whenever I'm using this for work, and I'm like, oh, you know, there is a what if. And it means that at weddings, when I've used this or I've used the Q3, I'm always backing up as the day goes on to make sure everything is backed up safely. But yeah, I would love to see maybe in the Q4 if they were to put internal storage, like in how they have in the M11P. I think 256 gigabytes of internal storage in a camera like this would be wonderful, and that's kind of a great amount for wedding photographers in particular. The next downside for me, and kind of another main reason why I decided to upgrade to the Q3, is the low light performance. I think on the Q2, once you kind of get to like, I say 3200, I personally feel like it gets a bit muddy, the image gets a bit degraded, and the image quality isn't amazing from that point. Like, to be expected, kind of for a high megapixel camera, but I do find the Q3 to be a bit more manageable. The files seem to work at those higher ISOs a bit better. So yeah, something to consider. One other downside for me for the Q2, and the reason I upgraded to the Q3, is that there's no USB charging on the Q2. And that sounds super pedantic, and it definitely is, but having USB-C charging on the Q3 is great. And like, it means that when I go away on a holiday, I can just take that, a spare battery and a USB-C cable, and it does create kind of a very much of a cinema profile when you're traveling to have that, because the charger for these is quite big. It's not that much smaller than the body of the camera, and so it does take up quite a bit of space if you're trying to travel light. Maybe not an issue for you, but it's just personally for me, I enjoy that. And then the other benefit of having a USB-C socket in the camera, it means that you can offload photos directly via the USB-C cable, which will prolong the life of your SD cards because you're not having to take them in and out, and reduces the chances of them breaking. The fixed screen is worth a conversation. On this camera, it's really flush and really nice, and the back design of this camera is great. But I will say that it does limit you. If you've got to be really low or you've got to be really high, and particularly at a wedding, if you've got to be up high and you're like trying to peek at like what's on the screen, it can be a little bit tricky with this camera, whereas on the Q3 you've got that versatility. So I don't know, this is lovely. Like, design-wise, I prefer this. It would be very remiss of me to not talk about the autofocus of the camera. I think it's a massive point of contention on this camera, and as to whether it's good enough or it's good or bad objectively. I think, to be honest, it's really subjective, and it really depends on your expectations and potentially where you're coming from. I think if you're coming from DSLRs, you might find this to be very similar, but if you're coming from the latest mirrorless body, you might find this to be quite a few steps back. I think if you use the camera in single point autofocus, it's great. It's very accurate, it doesn't often miss, and particularly for kind of travel photography, interiors, street, I think it's fine. It's not amazing, but it's fine. It gets the job done like 9 times out of 10. But I will say, if you are doing weddings or sports or fast moving things and people are moving, you're tracking, this camera might not provide you with that level of autofocus. It has it, but I wouldn't say it's amazing. Like, you can put it into continuous autofocus and you can put it into tracking, and it will do a decent job at like tracking things that are moving. And I've used it as people walk down the aisle, I've used it during confetti, and I've got photos, but it's not perfect. And I personally think you're better sticking to AFS and spot focus or field focus. And that's kind of where I find this camera works best. Okay, so who do I think this camera is for? I think it's obviously not a cheap camera, but I think the Q2 now can be picked up secondhand for a relatively reasonable price. So I would say, if you're planning to use this camera for fun and for pleasure, and you don't mind some of the other downsides I spoke about, I think the Q2 makes a really great, compelling option compared to the Q3, and particularly if you can get it secondhand. Yeah, I still think it's a great camera, and you'll have so much fun with it. It really does suit wedding photographers that don't mind that it's only got one card slot. Maybe it's your secondary camera or auxiliary camera, and it allows you to be very discreet. It also works really well for interior photographers. You want a lightweight travel kit, and you want this for your wide angle, and you're going for something with a 50mm or something equivalent to sort of pair it with. I've used it to photograph properties in the past, and used this and then used another body with a 50, and it's been a great pairing, and yeah, really really enjoyed that lightweight approach to travel photography and interiors. It really benefits if you like to get close to your subject. Obviously with a wide angle lens, I think it really suits itself to that. So yeah, if you like that kind of photography, this is a great option. And I do think it's just a great camera for people that value kind of like a tactile photography experience. It's a really enjoyable camera to use in that regard. And if you're kind of looking towards like an M series camera, but you want something with autofocus that's got a few other bits, this can be a great camera for that, because it gives you the tactile kind of feeling of like an M body, but you've still got the autofocus and some of the other perks of a camera like this. But yeah, that's kind of it from me. That's my thoughts on this camera. I'm gonna try and film a video where I directly shoot this side by side with the Q3, so we can kind of look through some of the sample images like side by side. But yeah, if you have any questions about the camera and my experience with it, feel free to comment in the down below, or send me a DM on Instagram and I'll happily try and get back to you. But yeah, thanks so much for your time, and yeah, hopefully see you again soon.